In today's episode, my grandma complied with her husband's request for over 50 years, much to his chagrin. Long. Change me from hourly to salary to cut my pay. Okay. Manager wants me to identify people every time I encounter someone at alarm. Sure thing. So let's get started. My grandma complied with her husband's request for over 50 years, much to his chagrin. Long. Something someone said to me today reminded me of this tale, and I thought some of you would appreciate hearing it. So, this is my grandmother's story. My family has been telling the tale for decades. Grandpa himself told it to his daughter's fiancé as a lesson in not underestimating his new bride. Grandma told it slightly differently to my mom when she and my father were engaged. This is somewhere between the two versions. It's a lesson in be careful what you wish for, as you just might get it. Personally, I've always thought that it was hilarious. My grandparents were very old school. Grandpa got a job working for John Deere as a teen and worked his way up the ladder to foreman, then manager. Grandma was a typical housewife in the 1950s, and was held to typical housewife standards. She was to cook and clean and be prepared to entertain Grandpa's business associates at a moment's notice. It was her job to make sure the children were taken care of and never got in her husband's way. She was expected to have dinner on the table at 5:30 sharp, when he got home from work. Her house and herself were to be impeccably kept at all times, etc. They were progressive and well off enough that Grandma had her own car. She was expected to use it to run the household errands and take the 4 kids to appointments and such. It was important that her husband not be bothered with such things. The household and family were her responsibility. He had a job. Well, one day, Grandpa arrived home from work, and not only was dinner not on the table, but Grandma wasn't even there. The kids, teens at the time, hadn't been fed. Their homework was still on the kitchen table. There were unwashed dishes in the sink, and a dozen other little chores hadn't been done yet. Most importantly, Grandpa was inconvenienced. He'd been home just long enough to let his frustration stew into anger when Grandma's car pulled into the drive. He began shouting at her before she'd even had the chance to set down her purse or take off her jacket. He ranted about all the things she hadn't done because she was out running around when she should have been home, taking care of the house and making his dinner. He worked very hard all day to provide for this family. Was it too much to ask for a hot dinner when he got home? She'd had a very good reason for not being home, but he never let her tell it, accepting no excuses. But she was a good wife, so she intended to let him vent for a while, then she would serve him supper and explain what had gone wrong. Then, Grandpa screwed up. As sometimes happens when we speak in anger, he began to blame the wrong thing for his irritation. He began to blame the car and her access to it. He said something to the effect of, "You don't have any business out driving around anyway. You should be home. I should never have let you start driving in the first place. Women shouldn't drive." "You don't want me to drive?" Grandma asked calmly, retrieving her keys from her purse. "Fine. Then I won't drive ever again." And she set those car keys on the counter, put her things away, and served dinner. And bless her heart, Grandma stuck with that declaration no matter how much more difficult it made life. Grandpa had to take afternoons off in the middle of the week when a teacher scheduled a meeting. He didn't get a moment's peace on the weekends, between grocery trips and taking the kids to activities or doctor's appointments or for haircuts or clothes. He had to drive Grandma to every Saturday salon appointment. Previously, Grandma had taken herself and the kids to church, letting him sleep. Now, he had to wake up early on Sundays to take them all himself. Grandpa was nearly as stubborn as his wife. He held out, expecting her to apologize and ask for her keys back. She never did. Instead, she simply rearranged the household schedule so that he could handle all the driving. Months later, after never getting a single weekend to relax, after having dinner pushed back nearly every day because he had to drive someone someplace, he finally gave in and apologized. He tried to tell her that he was wrong and that she should start driving again. He tried to tell her that he now appreciated all she did to make his life easier. He all but begged her to take those keys. I suspect that Grandma had always disliked driving, because she never did take back those keys. Nothing Grandpa said or did could convince her to get back behind the wheel. He'd said she had no business driving a car, and she was going to hold him to that declaration, no matter what. For over 50 years, until the day she died, Grandma never drove a car again for any reason. Not after the kids graduated and moved out. Not after Grandpa retired. Even after Grandpa's death in the 80s, she still refused because my husband always said that women shouldn't drive. Change me from hourly to salary to cut my pay. Okay. This takes place in the before times when people could eat out and gather in large numbers. I used to work as a chef for an owner who liked to micromanage things and was a bit narcissistic. I'd been working there about 3 years, getting good reviews, customers loved me, updated the menu. Made everything from scratch. People used to think the place was open box/heat, serve food. Quality had gone up, morale was great in my kitchen. Annual sales went from $850,000 to $1.4 million, about maximum capacity for the space. The increase in sales and income went to the owner's head. He was always spending money on frivolous things and squandering cash. Sound system, stage for the event space, ECT. One example, I needed a new alto sham, a used one would have sufficed. Nope, bought the top of the line one that could be used as a smoker to $12,000 versus what I wanted could be gotten used for $1,500. Granted, I enjoyed that piece of equipment, which after I left they no longer used the smoker function. Years later, I still occasionally get emails invoices from a vendor, and see they bring in pre-cooked smoked meats now. I was hourly, but then the owner realized during the busy season I and my sous chef put in 70 to 80-hour weeks. Doing this, he realized I made more take-home pay from his business than he did. At peak times he'd maybe work 40 to 50 hours a week. So to save money, he puts me and my sous on salary, effectively cutting my pay by about $10,000 a year. My sous netted a loss of $2,000 per year, if we were to work at our current level of effort. During all of this, the owner is saying he is not expecting us to work over 40 hours a week, ever. He even has this written into our contracts. So with the extra time off at home with family, it is okay. I still like the job and my staff. During the slower time, this was great. Also during this time I had won a local award for my cooking, and the narcissistic owner was not too pleased. He was no longer recognized as the creative force in the kitchen that bears his name, so his meddling and micromanaging increased. It had gone from "it's your kitchen, cop chef, do what you want" to "it's my name and my kitchen, do it this way." Morale and quality began to suffer. Just prior to the holiday season, my sous wants to go back to his home country for 2.5 months, November, December and January, peak crazy time for us. I have good help and am good with it. Owner approved the time off. Owner thinking I am gonna save him some dollar that holiday season by working my usual 70 to 80 hours a week. Nope, cue the malicious compliance. I start writing the holiday schedule. Sue is on vacation. I have my 40 during key prep times and peak business times. The rest if my staff gets serious overtime. Basically, the Sue and I carried a lot of the weight in the kitchen and could outperform most of our small staff. So with Sue on vacay, and I only pulling 40, full-time staff is now working 60-ish hours a week, and part-timers are getting 40. Things are running pretty smoothly until the owner realizes I'm not there like I always am during the holiday rush. He's in the kitchen more, trying to micromanage my staff, giving them poor advice, contradicting my directions, and timing for events, screwing up the small parties my staff could handle while I am off. After a few weeks of this, he realizes he's going to be paying the staff out more in overtime than he saved on moving me and my Sue to salary. He starts demanding I work more hours to stop hemorrhaging OT to the kitchen staff. I show him my contract where I am not expected to work over 40 hours a week. Now, he says it's just a guideline. I hold him to the 40 a week. It's Christmas, and now I can for once spend time with my family. Now with my sue returning, I'm burned out from the constant micromanaging and gaslighting by the owner. I hand the reins to my sue and change careers after 25 years in the industry and never look back. Manager wants me to identify people every time I encounter someone at alarm. Sure thing. So a little story from years ago about an assistant manager that doesn't understand the work at all. Mandatory English isn't my first language, note, smiley face. I worked as a security guard driving around industrial areas and responding to alarms that go off at the buildings from our clients. When I started there I was told/learn to ask for proper ID, driving license, passport, ID card, if I encounter someone in the building, which was very common as most alarms came from people not turning off the alarm in time/entering the wrong code, and note their details in the report. But, and this will be important later on, if they can't show ID, kindly request them to leave and close the building. If they refuse, call police to deal with it. Some background to make things clear. Our laws here make it so that security guards are just civilians. Which means I can ask for ID, but if they refuse to give it there is nothing I can do. Only law enforcement officers can demand IDs. Also, my assistant manager hates me for some reason, always looking for something to pin on me. So for a few years I do this as I was learned, ask for ID if I found someone in the building, and ask them to leave if they refused or didn't have one with them. Some would show credit cards or other things with their name on it, then I would write it in my report, but still ask them to leave. All this time the assistant manager would go over these reports in the morning. But I never heard any complaint about it. So I was doing stuff right, I thought. After a few years on this particular day I get an alarm, so I drove there. I arrive at the building, go in and find the cleaning lady doing her job. The alarm system logs show she entered the wrong code the first time, and was just a little too late entering it correct the second time. As would happen a lot. I kindly ask her for an ID and she tells me she doesn't have any with her. She show me a bank card with her name. I write down the name in the report, including it was from a bank card, and tell her she has to leave. She understands, pick up her stuff and leaves. I finish my report and go on my merry way. The next morning I receive an email from my assistant manager, going mental over the fact I send the cleaning lady away without nothing down proper ID details. And telling me the client is mad because they wanted to know who was in the building. I calmly reply that I did what I always did and was instructed to do when I joined the company. And had been doing without any issue for the last 3 or 4 years. The reply came fast with detailed instructions. If someone doesn't have proper ID on them, you call the police and have them identify the person so you can note it in your report. The assistant manager also made a memo stating this to everyone in the unit. Which I of course also made a copy of. As the good employee that I am, I followed that instruction to the letter. Most others didn't, as they weren't targeted by the assistant manager. So they could do whatever they wanted. I called the police every time a person couldn't show me proper ID. Which happened almost every shift I worked, if not multiple times in a single shift. Leading to a few employees of clients actually being arrested for failing to identify to a law enforcement officer. This wasn't my intention at all. Some police officers were jerks and just arrested them even though they could verify the identity of someone fairly simple on location. The police calling my manager why the hell they were called every single day to go and confirm someone's name, because they didn't have ID on them. Multiple clients calling the manager why a simple alarm was taking 3 times longer than usual. Clients have to pay per 15 minutes I am on site after the initial 15 minutes have passed, and refusing to pay the extra fee for me waiting for the police to show up. As I expected, I got invited for a talk with my manager and assistant manager to discuss some things. Basically my manager wanted to chew me out over all these calls he had been getting. Let alone people being arrested. The next day I sit down with my manager and the assistant manager, being very cheerful as his favorite target was getting a huge reprimand. The manager asks me why I called to police every time someone doesn't have a proper ID, asking me if I have any idea how pissed off the police is, and how many clients are refusing to pay the fee because it takes so much longer now I have to wait for the police. Basically, I costed the company a lot of money. After the manager has asked these questions, I pull out my folder containing the email conversation with the assistant manager instructing me to do exactly that. And the copy of the, now conveniently disappeared from the office, memo with the same instructions. Both signed by assistant manager. The same assistant manager that is now turning pale realizing what I'm about to hand over to the manager. I calmly explain the manager while he is reading both papers, that I am only following the instructions given to me, as I had clearly been doing it wrong for the last 3 to 4 years prior to this incident. The face of the manager is slowly turning red from anger, while the assistant manager is turning paler by the second. Before the manager explodes, he asks me to go grab a coffee and wait till he calls me back in. They needed to go over these papers and decide what they would do with me. Sure thing, boss. While I'm enjoying my coffee, I can hear my manager go mental to his assistant. Multiple things like how can you be so stupid, and they have it on percent hashtag $@ at paper, you idiot, are clearly heard across the entire floor. When I get called back in, I can see my assistant manager sitting silently, shamefully behind his computer, attempting to avoid any and all eye contact with me. The manager calmly explains he wasn't aware of these papers, and that I should follow the instructions as all other employees should, saving face, as admitting this was wrong and changing the instructions would mean defeat of the management. And that he would inform all clients about this, so they can avoid these kind of incidents. I spend the next 9 years following these instructions, which angered the assistant manager as he would read my reports every morning, telling about how the police had to show up again and again for something silly. Eventually they found a way to get rid of me, reassigning me to a new position, which I gladly accepted as the work was a lot more fun. I actually became a law enforcement officer with that switch. The pay was better and the hours were even sweeter. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.